bonfire had not even burned down when Aurelia Silverclaw learned exactly what kind of husband fate had given her. The scent of pine still clung to the ceremonial platform. The silver blessing of the moon goddess still glowed faintly across the backs of two joined hands. Hundreds of wolves had stood in the cold night air and watched Alpha King Vincent Blackfang promise, before his pack, before his elders, and before the moon itself, to stand beside his Luna for as long as they both lived. Less than an hour later, he walked away without saying a single word. Aurelia stood alone beneath the stone arches of Blackfang Keep, while Vincent disappeared into the western tower. No explanation, no apology, no goodbye. He did not think he owed her one. Soft laughter drifted down the candlelit corridor, and everyone in that hallway knew exactly whose chamber he had chosen on his mating night. The servants lowered their eyes. The elders suddenly found the stone floor very interesting. Every wolf in that keep waited for the new Luna to break down and cry. She did not. Aurelia reached up, unclasped her ceremonial cloak, and let it slide from her shoulders. She asked a passing servant for a pot of black tea. Then she asked for the treasury ledgers, the vault keys, the pack census. And while her husband laughed with another woman 2 floors above her, Aurelia Silverclaw sat down at a long wooden table and began rebuilding a kingdom that did not yet understand it belonged to her. By the time the sun rose over Blackfang territory, nothing would ever be the same again. Blackfang Pack had once been the pride of the Northern Territories. Old wolves still spoke of the days when Blackfang warriors were the first ones called to defend the smaller packs, when Blackfang grain stores fed villages through the harshest winters, when an invitation to the Blackfang assembly meant something. That pack no longer existed. What remained was a name, a crumbling keep, and a young Alpha King who had inherited more debt than glory. Vincent Blackfang became Alpha at 22, after his father's sudden death left him a title he was not ready to carry. He had spent the following 4 years surrounded by advisors who told him what he wanted to hear, and a mistress who asked for nothing but his attention. Meanwhile, the pack's coffers emptied, quietly, one bad decision at a time. Aurelia Silverclaw grew up far from Blackfang, in a house that never once worried about money. Her family had built their wealth over 3 generations of shrewd trade and careful alliances. She was the second daughter, the quiet one, the one who read financial reports for entertainment, while her older sister collected marriage proposals like trophies. When the Silverclaw and Blackfang elders arranged the mating between Vincent and Aurelia, nobody asked her if she wanted romance. They asked her if she understood the arrangement. Her family's wealth would rescue a dying kingdom. In exchange, she would become Luna, of one of the oldest Alpha bloodlines in the region. Aurelia agreed without hesitation. She did not need love. She had grown up watching her parents build something lasting out of mutual respect, and she believed she could build the same thing with a stranger, given enough patience and enough time. She was wrong about very little in her life. She would be wrong about this. The mating ceremony took place beneath a clear autumn sky, on a platform overlooking the Blackfang training grounds. Aurelia wore a gown the color of moonlight, and when Vincent took her hand in front of the entire pack, she allowed herself, just for a moment, to hope. He barely looked at her. His eyes kept drifting toward the crowd, toward a woman standing near the front with dark hair and a knowing smile. Aurelia noticed. She said nothing. A Luna did not embarrass herself in front of an entire kingdom on her mating night, no matter what she noticed. The elder finished the binding words. The silver light of the moon goddess settled over their joined hands, and the pack erupted into cheers that echoed off the stone walls of the keep. Vincent released her hand before the cheering even faded. "I have matters to attend to," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. Aurelia inclined her head. Of course. She watched him walk toward the western tower, toward the woman with dark hair who had already slipped away from the crowd. She watched the distance between them grow, step by step, until he vanished through a doorway and did not look back. The servants who remained on the platform exchanged uneasy glances. An elder cleared his throat and suggested the new Luna might like to rest after such a long ceremony. Aurelia straightened her spine. "I would like the treasury ledgers brought to the east study," she said, "and a pot of black tea, if it isn't too much trouble." The elder blinked. "My lady, it is your mating night." "Surely, the ledgers," Aurelia repeated. gently but without room for argument. "Tonight, please." She walked into Black Fang Keep alone, past whispering servants, past elders who did not know what to make of her, and settled into a cold study with a stack of financial records nobody had properly organized in years. She did not cry. She did not send a furious letter to her father demanding he end the arrangement. She opened the first ledger and began to read. What she found stole the breath from her chest. Grain reserves that should have lasted through winter were nearly empty. Warrior wages had gone unpaid for 3 months. An entire village near the eastern border had not received a healer's visit in over a year. Numbers had been quietly moved between accounts in ways that made no sense unless someone was hiding exactly how much money had disappeared. Aurelia had expected a wounded pride and perhaps a distracted husband. She had not expected to discover that the kingdom she had just married into was collapsing. She closed the first ledger as the candle beside her burned low, and somewhere above her, faint laughter still drifted through the halls of Black Fang Keep. Aurelia did not think about the woman upstairs. She thought about the empty grain stores and the unpaid warriors, and the healer who had never visited that eastern village. Black Fang was not being destroyed by an enemy at its gates. It was being destroyed from within, one careless decision at a time, and nobody in this keep had noticed or cared enough to stop it. She poured herself another cup of tea, pulled the second ledger toward her, and kept reading until the sky outside her window turned pale with morning light. By the third day, the servants of Black Fang Keep had started calling her something new behind closed doors. Not the abandoned bride, not the forgotten Luna. They called her the Quiet Storm. Aurelia spent those first days buried in records nobody had wanted to organize. She learned the names of every steward, every treasurer, every council secretary who touched the kingdom's finances. She learned which officials avoided eye contact when asked simple questions about missing funds. She learned which villages had been forgotten, and which ones still, somehow, managed to send tribute despite receiving nothing in return. She discovered that grain shipments meant for the northern villages had been quietly redirected and sold at a profit that never reached the treasury. She discovered that 3 separate officials had approved personal expenses using funds meant for warrior wages. She discovered that the Healers Guild had not been paid in 5 months, which explained why half the healing stations across Black Fang territory now stood empty. None of this had happened overnight. It had happened slowly, over years, while a young Alpha King distracted himself with a woman who told him everything was fine. Aurelia summoned the royal steward on the 4th morning. He arrived expecting a grieving bride who wanted comfort. Instead, he found a composed young woman seated behind a desk, covered in neatly organized ledgers, waiting for him with a list of questions. "Explain to me," Aurelia said, sliding a page toward him, "why grain meant for 3 northern villages was sold to a merchant in the capital, and why that sale never appeared in the treasury records." The steward's face went pale. He stammered something about clerical errors and difficult years. Aurelia listened without interrupting. When he finished, she folded her hands and studied him with a calm that unsettled him more than any shouting could have. "I am not interested in punishing honest mistakes," she said. "I am interested in whether Black Fang has a future. Right now, the numbers tell me it does not, unless something changes immediately." The steward left that meeting shaken, and word spread quickly through the keep. The new Luna did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She simply asked questions nobody had bothered to ask in years, and she remembered every answer. Over the following week, Aurelia met with the treasurer, the council secretaries, the captain of the warriors, and the head of the Healers Guild. She listened more than she spoke. She wrote down every complaint, every excuse, every quiet confession of where the money had gone. Slowly, the keep began to change. Warriors who had gone unpaid for months found their wages restored, funded by expenses Aurelia cut from the officials who had been quietly enriching themselves. Healer stations that had stood empty began receiving supplies again. A shipment of grain, recovered after Aurelia personally confronted the merchant who had purchased it under questionable terms, made its way back toward the northern villages. The servants noticed. They began greeting her with genuine warmth instead of nervous politeness. An elderly cook started leaving her favorite tea blend outside the study door each evening without being asked. A young stable hand quietly mentioned that his brother, one of the unpaid warriors, had wept with relief when his wages finally arrived. Vincent noticed too, though not immediately. He had spent the first week of his marriage barely inside the keep at all, splitting his time between council duties he did not enjoy and the company of Seraphina Nightbane, who had made herself comfortable in a set of rooms in the Western Tower, as though she, and not Aurelia, were the one who belonged there. It was Seraphina who first mentioned the changes to him, though not out of concern. "Your little bride has been busy," she said one evening, trailing a hand along his shoulder, "playing steward. It's almost charming, watching her pretend she matters here." Vincent said nothing, but something in her words settled uncomfortably in his chest. He had heard whispers in the training yard, warriors thanking someone for wages they had given up expecting. He had noticed the healer's station near the keep had reopened its doors. He told himself it meant nothing. He did not yet understand that the ground beneath his throne had already begun to shift. On the 7th evening, Aurelia called the royal steward into her study one final time. She had reviewed every ledger, corrected every error she could find, and reached a decision she intended to make permanent. "Beginning tomorrow," she said, "every expense from this keep, no matter how small, requires the Luna's seal before it is approved." The steward hesitated. "My lady, that authority has always belonged to the Alpha, or to whoever he appoints. Then he may appoint me," Aurelia said simply. "Or he may explain to this pack why their Luna, who has spent 7 days repairing what he ignored for 4 years, should not be trusted to protect their future." The steward bowed his head and did not argue further. By morning, every official in Blackfang Keep understood something had changed, even if nobody said it aloud. Power had shifted quietly, the way water finds a path around stone, patient and unstoppable, and Aurelia Silverclaw now stood at the center of it. Vincent finally understood how much had changed on the morning a council member addressed his own wife before addressing him. The council had gathered to discuss the upcoming trade agreement with a neighboring pack, a discussion Vincent had been dreading for weeks because he did not fully understand the terms being proposed. He took his seat at the head of the table, expecting the usual confused arguing that passed for governance in Blackfang Keep. Instead, one of the older council members turned immediately to Aurelia, seated near the end of the table, and asked, "Luna, what is your assessment of the proposed grain tariffs?" Aurelia answered without hesitation, laying out numbers, projected harvest yields, and a counter-proposal that would benefit Blackfang far more than the original terms. The council members nodded along, several taking notes, clearly more interested in her analysis than anything Vincent might have offered. Vincent sat at the head of the table and said nothing, because he had nothing to say. He did not know the numbers. He had never asked to see them. Humiliation burned quietly beneath his skin, but beneath the humiliation sat something harder to name. He had walked into that room as the Alpha King of Blackfang, and somehow, without a single confrontation, he had become a spectator in his own council chamber. He found Seraphina that evening in her chambers, restless and irritated in a way he could not quite explain. "She is making a fool of me," he said, pacing before the fire. "The council listens to her before they listen to me." Seraphina poured him a glass of wine, her voice smooth and practiced. "Then remind them who holds the title. Remind her, too. She married into this pack. She does not run it." Vincent nodded, gripping the words like something solid to stand on, and the next morning he marched into Aurelia's study, determined to reassert himself as Alpha. Aurelia looked up from her ledgers, unbothered by the sharpness in his expression. "You've been undermining me," Vincent said, closing the door behind him. "The council answers to you now instead of me. The warriors thank you instead of me. My own steward asks your permission before mine." "I have not undermined anything," Aurelia said calmly. "I have simply done what needed doing. If you would like to know exactly what I've corrected, I have every ledger here, organized by month. I don't need a lecture on numbers. You need something," Aurelia said, and for the first time, a hint of steel entered her voice. "Because this pack was 3 months from losing its warriors to starvation wages, and 2 seasons from a famine, your own steward was too afraid to report to you. I did not take your kingdom from you, Vincent. I found it already slipping through your fingers, and I caught what I could." Vincent opened his mouth to argue, and found he had nothing to say. He had not known about the warrior wages. He had not known about the famine risk. He had known about none of it, because he had never once asked. "Show me," he said finally, quieter than before. Aurelia turned the nearest ledger toward him, and for the next hour, walked him through months of financial collapse he had never noticed happening around him. Missing grain shipments, corrupt officials, villages that had gone without a healer's visit for over a year, warriors who had considered abandoning the pack entirely before their wages were restored. By the time she finished, Vincent sat in silence, staring at numbers that painted a picture of a kingdom he had claimed to rule, but had never truly understood. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" he asked, and the question sounded smaller than he intended. "Perhaps," Aurelia said, not unkindly, "because you never gave anyone a reason to think you wanted to know." The words landed harder than any accusation could have. Vincent left her study that afternoon, carrying something he had not expected to feel on his own mating week. Shame, quiet and unfamiliar, settling into a chest that had spent 4 years avoiding responsibility. He did not confront Aurelia again after that. He watched her instead, from a distance, as she moved through the keep correcting problems he had never even seen. He watched warriors salute her with genuine respect. He watched villagers speak her name with gratitude, usually reserved for an alpha they trusted with their lives. Vincent Blackfang had worn the alpha's crown since he was 22 years old. For the first time, he understood that wearing a crown and earning a kingdom's trust were not the same thing at all, and only one of them belonged to him. Vincent expected Aurelia to demand an apology, or perhaps a public acknowledgement of everything she had done. She asked for neither. Instead, she found him standing near the training grounds one grey morning, watching warriors practice with a distant, unreadable expression, and said something that surprised him more than any accusation would have. "If you want to lead this kingdom," she said, "learn how it survives." Vincent turned to look at her, waiting for the rest of the sentence, some condition or demand. It did not come. "I'm not asking you to hand me your crown," Aurelia continued. "I'm asking you to earn the right to wear it. Walk among your people, understand what keeps them alive, then decide whether you still want the throne, and whether you're willing to work for it." It was not the confrontation he had braced for. It was something quieter, and somehow far more difficult to ignore. The next morning, Vincent left the keep before sunrise, and walked to the eastern village where the healer's station had stood empty for over a year. He arrived unannounced, dressed plainly, and asked the village elder what the people needed most. He spent that day repairing a collapsed section of roofing on the healer's station, working beside builders who had no idea their Alpha King was among them until his hands were already covered in dust and splinters. He returned the following day to help repair fences damaged by wandering livestock. The day after that, he joined a group of farmers clearing a flooded irrigation channel, working until his back ached in ways council meetings had never caused. Word spread slowly through the villages. The Alpha King had been seen working alongside builders and farmers, without guards, without announcement, without complaint. Some wolves did not believe it until they saw him with their own eyes, sleeves rolled up, dirt beneath his fingernails, listening more than he spoke. Aurelia watched from a careful distance, saying nothing, offering no praise she had not yet decided he deserved. Serafina noticed the change too, and liked it far less than the villagers did. "You're embarrassing yourself," she told Vincent one evening, finding him exhausted after a long day spent helping rebuild a warrior's storm-damaged home. An Alpha King does not dig ditches like a common laborer. An Alpha King who never understood his people's struggles nearly lost his kingdom, Vincent said, too tired for the patience he once gave her. "I'd rather dig 100 ditches than lose everything my father built, because I was too proud to notice what was happening around me." Serafina's expression hardened, sensing something shifting beneath her that she could not quite name. She tried, over the following days, to pull him back toward the comfortable distraction he once offered her. She found a stranger instead, someone quieter, someone who no longer sought her out in the evenings, someone increasingly aware of how little she had ever truly given him besides comfortable lies. Within 2 weeks, Serafina packed her belongings and left Blackfang Keep without a formal farewell. Nobody stopped her. Nobody mourned her absence. The western tower rooms she once occupied sat empty, and the keep, if anything, felt lighter for it. Vincent did not celebrate her departure. He barely noticed it, absorbed as he was in villages and workshops and healer stations that demanded far more of his attention than any mistress ever had. Aurelia continued watching from a distance, cautious about trusting a change that had only just begun. But something in her hardened resolve had started, quietly, to soften. One evening, exhausted from a long day helping rebuild a bridge near the southern border, Vincent found himself walking past Aurelia's study. The door stood open. She sat surrounded by ledgers as always, candlelight catching the tired lines around her eyes. He hesitated in the doorway longer than he intended. "Thank you," he said finally. Aurelia looked up, surprised by the simplicity of it. No excuses attached. No conditions. For what, specifically? For not letting this kingdom fall apart while I was too foolish to see it happening, Vincent said. For not giving up on it, even when I gave you every reason to. Aurelia held his gaze for a long moment, searching for the arrogance that had lived there on their mating night. She did not find it. "You're welcome," she said quietly, and returned to her ledgers. Vincent left without another word, but something between them had shifted, small and fragile as new growth after a long winter, and neither of them was quite ready yet to name it. Winter arrived early that year, and it arrived cruel. The first storm buried the northern villages under snow, deeper than any elder could remember, collapsing 3 barns and cutting off the main road connecting Blackfang Keep to its outer territories. Food stores, still recovering from years of mismanagement, sat dangerously low, heading into the coldest months anyone could recall. Aurelia had spent the autumn preparing as best she could, redirecting recovered funds toward grain reserves and firewood stockpiles, but even her careful planning could not fully prepare Blackfang for a winter this severe. Vincent led the first rescue effort personally, riding out with a small group of warriors toward the collapsed barns before the storm had even fully passed. He returned 2 days later, half frozen, having personally carried an elderly wolf and 2 children through waist-deep snow after their home partially collapsed under the weight of ice. Aurelia met him at the gates, relief flooding through her chest before she could stop it, followed quickly by frustration that he had risked himself so recklessly. "You could have died out there," she said, wrapping a heavy blanket around his shoulders as warriors helped him toward the keep. "They would have died if I hadn't gone," Vincent said, teeth chattering. "I couldn't sit in a warm study while an entire village froze." Aurelia said nothing further, but something in her chest tightened at the sight of him, exhausted and frostbitten, but alive, having chosen his people over his own safety, without a moment's hesitation. The following weeks tested every resource Blackfang possessed. Aurelia organized supply routes, rationed grain carefully to stretch through the worst of the storms, and coordinated with the Healers Guild to ensure every village had access to warmth and medicine. Vincent led rescue parties, repaired damaged structures, and spent long nights beside warriors keeping watch over the keep's remaining livestock. They found themselves, more often than not, working side by side in the same room late into the night, planning supply routes over maps spread across Aurelia's desk, exhaustion wearing down the careful distance they had maintained since their mating night. "The southern storage barn won't hold through another storm like the last one," Vincent said one night, rubbing his eyes as he studied the map between them. "Then we move half the grain to the eastern cellars before the next storm arrives," Aurelia said. "It's not ideal, but it spreads the risk." Vincent nodded, then paused, studying her face in the candlelight rather than the map. "You haven't slept properly in days. Neither have you. That's different. I'm not the one holding this entire kingdom together with ledgers and sheer stubbornness." Aurelia allowed herself a small, tired smile, the first genuine one he had seen from her since their mating night. "Careful, Vincent. That almost sounded like a compliment." "It was," he said simply, and something warm passed between them that neither commented on. Over those long winter weeks, small moments accumulated quietly, between exhausted planning sessions and shared cups of tea passed back and forth in the cold hours before dawn. Vincent began noticing the particular way Aurelia tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she concentrated on a difficult problem. Aurelia began noticing how Vincent's voice softened whenever he spoke about the villagers he had grown to know by name. Neither spoke of it directly. Both felt it building, quiet and unhurried, in the spaces between crisis and recovery. The worst storm arrived in late winter, burying the keep itself under snow for 3 days. Vincent and Aurelia worked together almost constantly during those days, coordinating rescue efforts, checking on trapped villagers, distributing what remained of the emergency supplies. On the final night of the storm, exhausted past the point of formal distance, they sat together near the fire in the great hall, sharing a simple meal of bread and broth, because the kitchens could offer little else. "We saved them," Vincent said quietly, staring into the flames. "Every village. Nobody died." "We saved them," Aurelia repeated, allowing herself to lean back against the chair, bone-tired but strangely peaceful. Vincent turned to look at her, firelight catching the exhaustion and quiet triumph on her face, and felt something shift fully into place inside his chest. Something he could no longer pretend was simple gratitude. Aurelia caught him looking and felt her own breath catch, unexpectedly, in her throat. She did not look away. Neither did he. Spring arrived slowly, melting the snow that had buried Blackfang territory for months, and with it came a challenge neither Vincent nor Aurelia had fully anticipated. Alpha King Damien Frostfang, ruler of a neighboring and considerably wealthier territory, requested a formal meeting to discuss trade terms along their shared border. Rumors suggested Frostfang intended to use Blackfang's difficult winter as leverage, pushing for an agreement that would favor his own pack at Blackfang's expense. The council gathered anxiously in the days before the meeting, aware that Blackfang's weakened state left little room for negotiation errors. Vincent had grown considerably more capable over the winter months, but trade negotiations with an experienced and calculating rival remained a different challenge entirely. Aurelia prepared meticulously, reviewing every trade agreement Blackfang had signed over the past decade, studying Frostfang's territory and its own vulnerabilities, searching for leverage that might balance an otherwise uneven negotiation. On the morning of the meeting, Alpha King Frostfang arrived with an entourage, dressed in furs, far finer than anything Blackfang's treasury could currently afford, his confidence obvious in every measured step he took into the council chamber. "Alpha Blackfang," Frostfang said, settling into his seat with practiced ease. "I trust your territory survived the winter reasonably intact." "Reasonably," Vincent said evenly, refusing to give away how close it had actually come to disaster. Frostfang smiled, clearly unconvinced, and began laying out his proposed terms that would grant his pack favorable access to Blackfang's river routes, in exchange for grain shipments Blackfang could barely spare. The council members shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward Vincent for a response he did not yet have prepared. In the tense silence that followed, Vincent did something nobody at that table expected. He turned toward Aurelia. "My Luna speaks for Blackfang in this matter," he said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. "Whatever she decides, I stand fully behind." A ripple of surprise moved through the council, and Frostfang's confident expression flickered, just slightly, as his attention shifted toward the quiet young Luna he had barely acknowledged until that moment. Aurelia did not hesitate. "Your proposed terms are generous to your own territory, and considerably less generous to mine, Alpha Frostfang," she said, calm and unhurried. "I propose instead a shared river route agreement, with Blackfang retaining priority access during harvest season, in exchange for Blackfang timber, which your territory currently lacks and desperately needs before your own winter arrives." Frostfang's expression shifted from amusement to careful reconsideration. He had clearly not expected such precise knowledge of his own territory's weaknesses. Over the following hour, Aurelia negotiated with a composure that left the entire council quietly astonished, countering each of Frostfang's attempts to gain advantage with data he had not anticipated her knowing, until the Alpha King finally agreed to terms that benefited Blackfang far more than anyone had believed possible that morning. When the meeting concluded, Frostfang rose to leave, pausing briefly beside Vincent. "Your Luna is formidable," he said, something close to respect in his voice. "You're fortunate to have her standing beside you." "I know," Vincent said simply, and meant it more deeply than Frostfang could have understood. News of the negotiations spread quickly through Blackfang territory, and further still, until whispers of the clever young Luna, who had outmaneuvered Alpha Frostfang, reached even the distant Silverclaw estate. Theodore Silverclaw, Aurelia's father, arrived at Blackfang Keep less than a month later, having heard troubling rumors about his daughter's mating night, and intending, if necessary, to bring her home. He arrived expecting a broken kingdom and a humiliated daughter. He found neither. Instead, he found villages recovering steadily from a brutal winter, warriors well-fed and loyal, a treasury carefully rebuilding itself, and a daughter who moved through her keep with quiet, unmistakable authority. He found his daughter and her husband seated together during a council meeting, working through a minor dispute between two villages with practiced ease, finishing each other's points, deferring naturally to one another's judgment. After the meeting ended, Theodore found a quiet moment alone with Vincent near the training grounds. "I came prepared to take my daughter home," he admitted. "I heard about your mating night." Vincent's jaw tightened, old shame surfacing briefly. "I don't deserve your forgiveness for that. I'm not certain I've fully earned hers either." "No," Theodore agreed. "But you've spent a winter proving you're trying to. That matters more than most men ever manage." He studied Vincent carefully. "You finally became the alpha my daughter deserved." Vincent said nothing, but he carried those words with him for a long time afterward, a quiet marker of exactly how far he had come from the man who had walked away from his own mating ceremony without a second glance. A year passed, faster than either of them expected once they stopped counting the days. Blackfang territory entered its greatest harvest season in decades that autumn, fields heavy with grain, storage barns rebuilt stronger than before, villages thriving under careful leadership neither Vincent nor Aurelia had managed alone. Warriors spoke proudly of their pack again. Children in the northern villages no longer went without healers or warm meals through the winter months. Seraphina Nightbane had become little more than a distant memory, a name occasionally mentioned in old gossip that carried no weight anymore. Nobody in Blackfang Keep spared her a second thought. On the anniversary of their mating ceremony, Vincent called the entire pack together on the same platform where their marriage had begun a year earlier, beneath a sky as clear as it had been that first night. Aurelia stood beside him, uncertain what he had planned, watching as he turned to face her in front of hundreds of gathered wolves. "A year ago, I stood on this platform and made promises I did not understand how to keep," Vincent said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "I walked away from the one wolf who deserved better than anything I offered her that night, and I have spent every day since trying to become someone worthy of standing beside her." He reached into his coat and withdrew a carved silver seal, engraved carefully with words that caught the afternoon light. "This kingdom survived because of Aurelia Silverclaw," Vincent continued. "It thrives because of her wisdom, her patience, and a strength I did not deserve to witness firsthand. Before this pack, before the elders, before the moon itself, I name her permanent High Luna of Blackfang, not because tradition requires it, but because she has earned every part of this kingdom through her own hands." He placed the seal gently into Aurelia's palms, engraved with her name and title, a symbol of authority freely given rather than simply inherited through marriage. Aurelia stared down at the seal, throat tight with emotion she rarely allowed herself to show in public. "You once told me you weren't certain you deserved forgiveness," she said quietly, only for him to hear. "I wasn't certain either, when this year began." "And now?" Vincent asked, searching her face. "Now I think forgiveness isn't something you earn all at once," Aurelia said. "It's something you earn every single day, the way you've earned it every day this past year. I forgive you, Vincent, not because you're perfect, because you became someone worth forgiving." The crowd erupted into cheers that echoed off the same stone walls that had witnessed their first, broken beginning exactly 1 year earlier. This time, Vincent did not walk away. He reached for Aurelia's hand, and this time, he did not let go. That evening, for the first time since their mating ceremony, Vincent and Aurelia walked together into the royal chambers, not out of obligation or arranged duty, but as two people who had built something real out of hardship, patience, and quiet, unwavering partnership. The story that began with betrayal on a moonlit platform closed in the very same place it started, except now, the entire kingdom watched their Alpha King refuse to take a single step without offering his Luna his hand first. Warriors bowed, elders bowed. Servants and children and villagers who had once doubted this marriage would survive its first cruel winter now bowed as well, not to an Alpha leading his Luna behind him, but to two rulers who had rebuilt an entire kingdom side by side, choosing each other freely, long after any arrangement required them to. The strongest alpha, Black Fang territory would say for generations afterward, is never the one who rules alone. It is the one wise enough to stand beside the Luna, who made him worthy of the crown he wears.